Um, all three lost, and Nasser, as you can see here, was catapulted to world fame, not only Egyptian or Arab fame, but he became a leader of uh, the non-alignment movement. He became a leader of the third world, and just one thing that I need to mention here is that the Israelis learned a very important lesson from this war, which is that it's not enough to win a war militarily. You have to have prepared the ground diplomatically so that you don't end up losing diplomatically what you have won militarily. So the War of 56 ends with a catastrophic defeat, military defeat of the Egyptians, but a stunning diplomatic victory. Nasser is becoming a world leader, and his popularity in Egypt and the entire Arab world skyrocketed. Eden lost his career, is out of the picture altogether. The beginning of an anti-colonial struggle throughout the world is launched, and the Israelis win militarily but lose diplomatically, and this is something that um, they never really forgot. Um, Back home, Nasser, uh, with his victory, continues his social and economic reforms. He had already started an ambitious process of land reform, whereby the legal structure of land holding was to be restructured. The big project of the Aswan Dam is finally launched in a big celebration, now with Soviet backing, with Soviet financing. And this is a short clip that you see about this project, the launch of the Aswan Dam.
Egypt launches the long-planned Aswan High Dam project, a billion-dollar power, irrigation, and flood control scheme that will increase the nation's arable land by 1/3. President Nasser and his guest, King Mohammed of Morocco, laid the foundation stone. And then the first phase of construction under Soviet financing begins. Nasser breaks ground with a 12-ton dynamite blast. As King Mohammed and another guest of honor, Russia's Electric Projects Minister Novikov, look on, Nasser sets off an enormous rock slide, formal groundbreaking, beginning of a vast project that will affect all Egypt's future.
Now, the second or the third confrontation, which is one of the most dramatic, not only in Egyptian history but in world history, really, it's something the likes of which I don't think many countries have witnessed, defeats likes of which many countries have witnessed, is the 1967 war. As we've seen, 1956, the Palestinian situation really hasn't changed much, hasn't changed at all, in fact. The Palestinian refugees were not allowed back. Palestine itself, what we call Palestine, Mandate Palestine, the territory we've been talking about, hasn't been touched. Military operations were in Sinai, but there is an indirect effect, which is that the Palestinians saw in Nasser their leader. They saw that he could actually deliver. He could actually rally the Arabs behind him and return through armed struggle Palestine to them. And he became a very popular figure for them. But Nasser was also very aware that of Israeli military superiority. He, throughout the years following 1956, he repeatedly avoided any direct military confrontation with Israel, and refused to be dragged into a military confrontation, knowing very well that the Egyptian army has no chance of winning it, that Egypt is not ready, that his resources should be devoted to internal reforms, and that is why he didn't engage in any military confrontations with the Israelis. Things, however, changed in 1967. The reasons why they changed is subject to a lot of controversy. I'm not going to go into them. Suffices to say that throughout the months of April and May of 1967, things were escalating on the ground. Military skirmishes are happening on the northern borders of Israel with Syria. Palestinian freedom fighters are also engaging across the border from Jordan, and Nasser is doing nothing. And popular opinion is gradually not turning against him, but asking serious and embarrassing questions of why he's not doing anything. In other words, he got implicated. I mean, this is to give him the benefit of the doubt. He got implicated in moving his troops while not really being ready for it. The key decisive moment, however, came in late May when he ordered the Straits of Tiran, you can see the map here, closed in front of Israeli navigation. Now, this is a very important waterway connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aqaba, all the way to the southern Israeli port of Eilat, which is Israel's outlet to the Red Sea. It's an important outlet, and Israel considered this to be an act of war. Considered it to be, as it's called in Latin, in international legal terms, a casus belli, an act of war. And this is important because you remember what I was just saying about how keen the Israelis now are, or the main lesson that they learned from 56 is to get their act together diplomatically, legally, and not only militarily. So they, from day one, decided to be prepared diplomatically, and when Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran for Israeli navigation, that is ships going to Israel, they decided that this is an act that they cannot tolerate. So they started moving their troops into close to the borders. Soviet intelligence informed Nasser of this. He mobilized, they mobilized, and the international United Nations troops in Sinai were ordered off. He told them to leave. So now the two armies were facing each other. Now, the most amazing thing about what happened later on is the fact that the Egyptians knew that Israel would attack. Not only that they knew when they were going to attack, on the first hours of the 5th of June 1967. Nasser, a few days earlier, met his generals in Sinai, told them to get prepared, told them that the Israelis would attack, and told them to be prepared for the first attack, to absorb it, because diplomatically it is important to make the Israelis appear as if they are the transgressors, because otherwise world public opinion will turn against Egypt. And he predicted that the attack would mostly happen on the 5th day of June, and indeed early on the early hours of the 5th of June, the Israelis launched their attack, simultaneous air raids on all Egyptian air bases. They managed in no more than 20 minutes to destroy something like 90% of the Egyptian Air Force. As you can see from this picture here, Most of the planes were destroyed while on the ground. They didn't even have a chance to fly, let alone to engage in the skies. Uh, with the Air Force gun, um, there was no cover for the army in Sinai. The army was then, Sinai was open skies for the Israelis. They had complete command of the skies there, and they shot at random and at will at the Egyptian army that retreated in complete disarray, losing and leaving their equipment without even fighting. The stories that one reads about, one hears, is of a complete breakdown of command, um, complete collapse of morale, people deserting their posts and marching sometimes on barefoot all the way to Egypt, to Cairo proper, to Cairo, at least to the Suez Canal. It was a crushing defeat. 90% of the Air Force was gone. About 80% of equipment was gone: tanks, personnel carriers, jeeps, anti-aircraft batteries. The army was not only defeated, was crushed, and the war was effectively lost in 20 minutes. This is a war that the Israelis are pleased always to call it the Six-Day Arab-Israeli War, because it lasted from the 5th of June to the 11th of June, but practically it actually was over in 20 minutes, because without an air force the fate of the army was sealed. Now I want to stop here and say a couple of things about this on a personal level, on a personal note, before we move on, because this is this is a very intriguing defeat. Again, my point is the following. If you just remember what I said a couple of minutes earlier, the balance of power was clear for everybody to see. Nasser himself knew that he had no chance. Any objective observer would have realized that Egypt would lose this round of military confrontation. So that's not shocking. That's not the question. The historical question is why the defeat had to be so devastating. That an army loses 90% of its equipment. The number of deaths is not that high, but the army to effectively be lost in this way, for the army to know in advance, this was not a surprise attack, for the army to know in advance the time and the place of the attack, and still to be defeated in such a humiliating, catastrophic, devastating way, begs a question. For me, this is not a military defeat. This is a defeat that is so thorough that one has to ask serious questions, not about who was where when, or who ordered what, or what the command was. It's not to be, in other words, explained on a pure military level. This is a defeat that illustrates that something very serious must have gone wrong with the army, with the relationship between Nasser and his generals, with the entire political system, and I would say with the cultural system. This is a cultural defeat. This is not only a military or a diplomatic or a political defeat. This is a cultural defeat. What do I mean by cultural defeat? I mean a defeat that is so devastating as to shake the society to its core, to its foundations, to make it look introspectively at how did this happen. This is a defeat that is similar to the defeat of the American South in the Civil War, or similar to the defeat of Germany in the First World War, or to the defeat of France in the Franco-Prussian War. These three defeats of these three different countries in these three wars were not only military defeats, they were catastrophic defeats, cultural defeats. The defeat of the American South in the Civil War meant the end of a lifestyle, the end of a world. the beginning of a very new world for the South, obviously, with very agonizing questions about lifestyle, the past, the future, what to do, how to live in this world. 67 was that kind of defeat. It was a defeat that shook not only Egypt but the entire region to its core. It's a defeat that we are still asking, and in my mind, we're still living its consequences and repercussions. On the simplest level, it's a defeat that begs the question of what went wrong with Nasserism. For the past 30 minutes, I've been talking about Nasser as a great hero, nationalizing the Suez Canal, standing up against to the Israelis and the French and the British, building the high dam, launching the non-alignment movements. All of that is true. But the question is, at what expense? What was missing? And I say personally, on a personal level, and this I'm saying in the wake of our own revolution now, that one big ingredient was missing, which is democracy. That despite his popularity, despite his populism, Nasser never really listened to his people, never inculcated in them any rights of self-rule. He never built democratic institutions. He abolished parliament. Parliament became a rubber stamp. Elections were not free. There's only one candidate for presidential referenda. Of course, he ended up winning 99.9% of them. Multi-party system is suspended. There's a single party ruling the country. The press is nationalized. Civil society is firmly under control of the state. All of this, I'm not saying that he was not popular. He was extremely popular. But the question is, what kind of popularity was this, and at what cost? And I think 67 cannot be explained without referring to the political structure that was put in place and the cult of Nasser. So the defeat, again, the defeat was not a simple defeat, a very humiliating defeat. You see here a picture of Egyptian prisoners of war in their underwear, photographed by Israeli army photographers to humiliate them. But it was humiliating. Whether or not they had their uniforms on is besides the point. The Israelis, of course, celebrated the victory on the southern flank, that is in Sinai, was not their only victory. They also managed to inflict a very heavy defeat on the Jordanian army, to capture the West Bank, to capture the eastern part of Jerusalem, driving even more Palestinians into exile, and also to inflict another defeat, all on 6 days, on the Syrians, and to capture the Golan Heights. So, and you see the pictures here celebrating their victory in Sinai.